Victoria Langford slammed a sealed envelope onto the boardroom table so hard the water glasses jumped. $3 million, she said, her voice cutting through the laughter. 3 million says the man holding that mop can't read a single line of this French contract. Every executive turned to stare at Malik Turner, the night janitor, the invisible man, the one nobody had ever bothered to learn the name of. He set down his cleaning cart. He didn't flinch. But here's the twist. Nobody in that glass tower saw coming. The janitor they were about to humiliate knew something about that contract, that 11 of their lawyers had missed something that could destroy them. Before we begin, drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from so I can see how far Malik's story travels tonight. And if stories about quiet dignity and unexpected justice move you, hit subscribe and stay with me till the end. The clock on the wall of the 41st floor read 11:47 p.m. and Malik Turner was on his knees, not praying, working, scrubbing a coffee stain out of the imported wool carpet outside the executive suite, the one somebody had spilled hours ago and left for the nightman to find. He worked the brush in slow circles, the way his late wife Danielle used to work a stubborn knot out of their daughter's hair. Patient, unhurried like the stain, and the child both deserved his full attention. "You missed a spot," a voice said above him. Malik looked up. It was Chad Bellamy, a junior associate from the Mergers Division, 26 years old, and already wearing a watch worth more than Malik made in a year. Chad wasn't pointing at any spot. He was just talking the way men like Chad talk to men like Malik, to hear themselves to feel large. "I'll get it," Malik said. "Do that." Chad stepped over him. Not around. Over one polished shoe swinging so close to Malik's shoulder that he could smell the leather. "And air this floor out before you go. Smells like a locker room up here." The elevator doors closed on Chad's back, and Malik went back to the stain. He'd learned a long time ago that there were two ways to survive a place like Langford Global Holdings when you wore the gray uniform instead of the gray suit. The first was to get angry, and angry men didn't last. Angry men got written up, got their hours cut, got replaced by the next desperate soul willing to mop marble at midnight for wages that barely covered a one-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood the executives would never drive through. The second way was to disappear, to become part of the building, to move through those hallways like weather noticed only when you were inconvenient, forgotten the instant you were gone. Malik had chosen the second way. For 4 years he had chosen it every single night. But here is the thing nobody at Langford knew about the man they stepped over. Malik Turner had not always been invisible. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, saw the name on the screen. Mrs. Okafor, and his stomach dropped the way it always did when the babysitter called after 10. "Mrs. Okafor, is Zoe okay?" She's fine. The old woman's voice was warm but tired. "She won't sleep, Malik. She's asking for you. She had the dream again." Malik closed his eyes. The dream. The one where her mother was standing at the foot of the bed, and Zoe couldn't hear what she was saying no matter how hard she tried. "Put her on," he said softly. There was a rustle, and then a small voice, thick with almost crying. "Daddy! Hey, baby! Hey, I'm here! You said you'd be home." "I know I did." He glanced down the empty corridor, lowered his voice. "I'll be home before you wake up, I promise. I'll be sitting right there, and the first thing you'll see is my ugly face." A wet little laugh. "You're not ugly. You haven't seen me at 6 in the morning. Daddy." A pause. "Can you tell me the thing Mommy used to say about the words?" Malik's throat tightened. He sat back on his heels there in the hallway of the richest company he had ever set foot in. And he said the words his wife had said 1,000 times, the words that had become a kind of prayer between them. "The real truth," he said quietly, "is always hidden beneath the language. You just have to be brave enough to read what the words are afraid to say." "I'm brave," Zoe whispered. "You're the bravest girl I know. Braver than your old man. Now close your eyes for Mrs. Okafor. I'll be there when you wake up." He stayed on the line until her breathing slowed, until Mrs. Okafor gently took the phone and said goodnight And then Malik Turner sat alone in a hallway on the 41st floor, 600 feet above a sleeping city, and let himself feel it for exactly 10 seconds. The grief, the exhaustion, the particular loneliness of a man raising a daughter with the ghost of a woman who should still be alive. 10 seconds. He'd learned to ration it. Then he stood up, gripped the handle of his cart, and went back to work. Danielle Turner had been the smartest person Malik ever met, and Malik had met a lot of smart people back when he was one of them. They'd met at Howard, both of them scholarship kids, both of them the first in their families to sit in a college classroom. Malik was studying international law. Danielle was studying comparative linguistics with a focus on legal translation. The delicate, dangerous art of carrying meaning across the border between one language and another without letting the truth get lost at the checkpoint. "You lawyers think words are yours," she used to tease him. "You think if you write it down in your fancy Latin phrases it means what you want it to mean. But words don't belong to anybody. Words are wild animals. I just learned how to walk among them without getting bitten." He'd loved her before he understood why, and once he understood why, he loved her more. They got married the summer after graduation. Malik took a job clerking for an international firm, working the kind of hours that ate a young man alive, chasing the dream partner, tracked the big office, the life they'd both grown up watching through television screens and never touching. Danielle built a career as a legal translator, quietly becoming the person the biggest firms in the city called when a contract crossed an ocean and the stakes ran into the hundreds of millions. French, Spanish, Portuguese, a little Mandarin. She could look at a clause written in a foreign language and tell you not just what it said, but what it was hiding. "This one's lying," she'd say, tapping a page. "See how they buried the jurisdiction clause here, 3 paragraphs after the section it belongs to? That's not sloppiness. That's a man hiding a knife in his sleeve." Malik used to sit at their kitchen table late at night and watch her work, and she'd teach him. Not because he needed it for his job, his firm had translators, but because she wanted him to see the way she saw. She wanted him to understand that language was never neutral, that every contract had a soul, and the soul was almost always afraid of something. For 6 years they had a life. A small apartment, then a slightly larger one. Zoe born on a cold February morning, 7 pounds and furious at the world. They didn't have money the way the people at Langford had money, but they had a plan and each other and a daughter who laughed like her mother. And then a drunk driver ran a red light on a Tuesday afternoon, while Danielle was crossing the street to pick up Zoe from daycare, and the plan, and the life, and the future all ended in the space of a single second, and Malik Turner's world went dark. He didn't remember much of the year that followed. He remembered the funeral. He remembered his firm's condolences sincere for about 3 weeks, and then increasingly impatient with a grieving man who could no longer bill 80 hours, who missed deadlines, who sat at his desk, staring at nothing. He remembered the day they let him go gently professionally with a severance package and a handshake, and the unmistakable message that grief was fine, but it wasn't billable. He remembered the savings running out, the medical debt from the hospital, the funeral costs, the sudden terrifying arithmetic of being a single father with no income. He remembered applying for jobs at other firms and hearing nothing because a lawyer with a gap in his resume and grief in his eyes was not a lawyer anybody wanted to gamble on. And he remembered finally the night he sat in his emptied-out apartment with a 3-year-old asleep in the next room and understood that pride was a luxury he could no longer afford. That Zoe needed to eat. That there was a job posting for a night custodian at a downtown high-rise, and it paid, and it was work, and work was work. He'd told himself it was temporary, just until he got back on his feet, just until the world remembered who he'd been. That was 4 years ago. At 12:30 a.m., Malik took the service elevator to the 44th floor, the legal division, the beating heart of Langford Global, where the deals that moved markets were built and torn apart and rebuilt. The floor was empty. Or it was supposed to be. He was wiping down the long glass conference table in the main litigation room when he noticed the papers. They were spread across the far end of the table, dozens of pages held down by a heavy crystal paperweight. Someone had been working late and left the mess for the morning, or for him. He almost cleaned around them without a second glance. You learned not to look too closely at what these people left behind, learned that curiosity was a way to get yourself accused of things. But the top page was in French, and Malik Turner, who had not read a word of legal French in 4 years, who had trained himself not to look, found that his eyes were already moving down the page before his brain could stop them. It was a contract, a big one, an acquisition agreement between Langford Global and a French energy conglomerate, the kind of deal that would be in the financial papers when it closed. Malik's eyes traveled the clauses the way you might find yourself humming a song you'd tried for years to forget, and then they stopped. There in the middle of the third page was a phrase, sous réserve de la compétence exclusive des tribunaux. Malik read it once, then again, and a cold, familiar feeling crept up the back of his neck, the feeling Danielle used to call the itch, the sense that something on the page was lying. Beside the French, someone had penciled in an English translation in the margin, a translation prepared presumably by one of Langford's very expensive lawyers, and the translation was wrong. Not wrong like a typo, wrong like a knife in a sleeve. The French said, exclusive jurisdiction of the French courts. The margin note said, jurisdiction of the applicable courts, vague, open, harmless. A translation that made a hard closed door look like an open field. A translation that would let Langford's lawyers believe they could fight any dispute on American soil in front of American judges under American law. But that wasn't what the contract said. The contract said that if this deal ever went bad, and deals this size went bad all the time, Langford would be dragged into a French courtroom under French law, playing a game whose rules they didn't understand on a field where they had already unknowingly surrendered the home advantage. Danielle's voice quiet in his memory. That's not sloppiness. That's a man hiding a knife in his sleeve. Malik stood very still. His heart was pounding in a way it hadn't in years. He looked at the pencil sitting right there on the table beside the pages. He thought about Zoe. He thought about how the smartest thing he could do, the safe thing, the invisible thing, was to put the pencil down and wipe the table and go home. Instead, his hand moved on its own. He picked up the pencil, and beside the wrong translation in small, careful handwriting, he wrote 3 words. This is wrong, and under it, quieter still, the correction. The real meaning. The truth the words were afraid to say. He set the pencil down exactly where he'd found it. He wiped down the rest of the table, careful now to keep his cloth away from the papers. And then he gathered his cart and left the 44th floor. And he told himself it didn't matter, that no one would ever notice that he was a ghost, and ghosts left no fingerprints. He was wrong about that. He was wrong about all of it, because somebody had been watching. Victoria Langford did not sleep more than 4 hours a night, and she considered this one of the reasons she was worth $11 billion, while other people were worth nothing at all. At 1 a.m., she was in her private office 2 floors above the litigation room, watching the security feeds. Not because she suspected anyone of anything, but because Victoria Langford watched everything. She had built her empire on the simple, ruthless principle that most people, most of the time, revealed exactly who they were when they thought no one was looking. She had fired executives for what she'd seen on those cameras. She had promoted people for it too. She called it the tax. The price of working for her was that she got to see the truth of you. She was half watching the feed from the litigation room, a report open on her other screen, when she saw the janitor stop. She'd seen him before. She saw everyone before. She knew the way he moved, economical, quiet, careful, a man taking up as little space as the world would allow him. She knew, in the vague way she knew such things, that he was black, that he was probably poor, that he was the kind of man her executives stepped past without seeing. She had never once wondered about his name, but now she watched him stop at the end of the conference table. She watched him look at the Beaumont papers, the French acquisition, the deal her legal team had been sweating over for 6 weeks, the deal that would close on Friday. She leaned forward. She watched the janitor read, and she knew he was reading. Really reading, because she had spent 30 years in rooms full of people pretending to read documents they didn't understand, And this was not that. This was a man whose eyes moved with purpose, whose stillness had weight to it. And then she watched him pick up a pencil and write on her contract. Victoria Langford's first instinct was fury. Who was this man to touch her documents to deface work that had cost her firm $200,000 in billable hours? She reached for her phone to call security to have him escorted out and fired before dawn. But something stopped her. A lifetime of watching people had taught her to notice the difference between a man doing something stupid and a man doing something deliberate. And what she'd just watched was not stupid. The janitor had not scrawled. He had corrected. He had read a French legal document, one of the most complex her firm had produced all year, and he had in under 2 minutes found something worth writing down. Victoria zoomed the camera. She couldn't read what he'd written from here, but she could read his face. And on the face of the invisible man who cleaned her floors at midnight, she saw an expression she recognized because she saw it in the mirror every morning. She saw certainty. Victoria sat back in her chair. For a long moment she said nothing. Thought. Nothing, simply turned the strange fact of what she'd seen over and over in her mind, like a jeweler examining a stone that had turned up in a bag of gravel. Then she picked up her phone and called down to the night desk. "The janitor working the upper floors tonight," she said. "I want his file on my desk in 10 minutes. Employment record application, everything." A pause. "No, don't touch him. Don't say a word to him. Just get me the file." She hung up, and Victoria Langford, who had humiliated more powerful men than the janitor could imagine, who had built a career on the cold pleasure of exposing people who thought they were smarter than they were, smiled a small, dangerous smile at the security feed. "Well now," she said to the empty office, "who are you?" Malik got home at 5:40 in the morning. The sun wasn't up yet, and the apartment was dark and quiet and cold. The radiator had been temperamental all winter, and the landlord kept promising to fix it. He let himself in as silently as he could, set his keys down soft, and crossed to the little bedroom where Zoe slept. She was curled up on top of the blankets, one arm thrown out her mother's stubborn chin, even in sleep. Malik pulled the blanket up over her, and keeping his promise, he settled himself into the old armchair beside her bed to wait for her to wake. He was so tired, his bones hummed with it. But he'd told her the first thing she'd see would be his face, and he had learned the hard way that promises were the only currency he had left to give her. He looked at his daughter in the gray light and thought about the contract. He shouldn't have written on it. He knew that. It was reckless, the kind of thing that could get a man in his position fired or worse. He'd spent 4 years being invisible precisely so that nothing he did would ever land on him, and in one thoughtless moment, he'd left his handwriting on a $100 million document belonging to one of the most powerful companies in the country. But he couldn't make himself regret it. Because when he'd read that clause, when he'd felt the itch and traced it and found the lie sitting there in the margin, he had felt for the first time in 4 years like himself. Like Malik Turner, who had once sat in his kitchen while his wife taught him to read the fear inside the words. Not the ghost who pushed a cart. The man. "You still have it," Danielle's voice said in his memory. "They took your job. They took me. They couldn't take that." "I miss you," he whispered to the empty room. "God, I miss you." Zoe stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, found his face in the dim light, and a slow, sleepy smile spread across her face. "You're here," she said. "I told you I would be." "You look tired, Daddy." "I'm a very handsome kind of tired." She giggled and reached for him, and he gathered her up, all 40 pounds of her, and held her against his chest, the way he'd held her the night her mother died, when she was too small to understand, and he was too broken to explain. "Daddy, are we going to be okay?" It was a question she asked more than a 7-year-old should have to. And Malik gave her the answer he always gave, the only one he had. "We're going to be okay, you and me, always." He didn't know, holding his daughter in that cold gray apartment that's 600 feet in the air, in an office at the top of a glass tower, a billionaire was already reading his file. He didn't know that his careful, invisible life was about to end. He didn't know that in less than 12 hours he would be standing in a boardroom full of people who despised him with $3 million and every ounce of his dignity on the line. He knew only this. His daughter was warm in his arms, the sun was coming up, and for one more morning, they were okay. God. Victoria read his file 3 times. She read it in the pale hours before dawn, sitting in her office with a cup of black coffee going cold beside her. And each time she read it, the thing she'd watched on the security feed made more sense and less sense at the same time. Malik Turner, age 39. Employed as a night custodian for 4 years and 2 months. Never late. Never a complaint. Never a single incident. Perfect attendance, which for a man his age with a young child, was Victoria knew almost unheard of. But it was the application that stopped her. Under education, most of her custodial staff listed a high school, sometimes a technical certificate. Malik Turner had listed a bachelor's degree in international law from Howard University. And when she'd had the night desk pull his full background, the check her HR department had run 4 years ago, and promptly forgotten, she'd found something the janitor had chosen to leave off the application entirely. A law degree. A clerkship at Ashford and Vane, one of the most prestigious international firms in the country. 3 years of practice. And then 4 years ago, nothing. A cliff. A career that simply stopped the way a road stops at the edge of a canyon. Victoria Langford had made her fortune reading between lines, and she read between these. A brilliant young lawyer. A promising career. And then a sudden total collapse into invisibility. She didn't have the details the file didn't mention. Danielle didn't mention the accident, didn't mention the grief that had swallowed a man whole, but she didn't need the details. She had watched enough lives break to recognize the shape of a break when she saw one. Here was a man who had once belonged in the rooms upstairs, and who had spent 4 years cleaning them at midnight without ever once mentioning that he could have sat at the table. Victoria found herself absurdly respecting him for it. And then she found herself suspicious of her own respect, because Victoria Langford did not respect people she tested them, and she had learned that the two feelings were dangerously easy to confuse. There was a knock at her door. Marcus Webb, her chief legal officer, entering with the particular stiffness of a man who'd been summoned before 6 a.m. and knew better than to complain about it. "You wanted to see me." The Beaumont contract. Victoria didn't look up. "Your team's translation of the jurisdiction clause, Section 4, page 3. Read it to me." Marcus frowned, pulling out his phone scrolling. "Jurisdiction of the applicable courts. Standard language. It gives us flexibility to litigate wherever's most favorable if the deal goes sideways. Why?" "You're certain?" "I'm certain. Delacroix reviewed it himself. He's our best French lawman. 11 people on that document, Victoria. It's clean." Victoria finally looked up at him, and she smiled the smile that made grown executives check their resumes. "Marcus," she said, "I want the entire executive board and the full legal team in the main boardroom at 3 o'clock this afternoon. Every one of them. Clear their calendars." "For what?" "For a demonstration." She turned back to her screen to the frozen image of a janitor with a pencil in his hand. "I'm going to teach my very expensive lawyers something about humility, and I'm going to find out exactly who I've been paying to mop my floors." He was asleep when the call came. He'd finally drifted off around 10. Zoe safely dropped at her summer program, the blackout curtains he'd hung himself, keeping the day shift world at bay so the nightman could rest. The phone rang 3 times before it dragged him up from the dark, and he answered it with his eyes still closed. "Hello, Mr. Turner." A woman's voice. Crisp, professional, entirely unfamiliar. "This is Sandra Choi, executive assistant to Ms. Langford. Ms. Langford would like to see you this afternoon at 3 o'clock. Malik sat up. Every ounce of sleep drained out of him at once, replaced by a cold flood of dread. Ms. Langford. Victoria Langford. The CEO. The name that appeared on the top of the building and the bottom of his paycheck, and had never in 4 years appeared anywhere near his own. The contract. She knew about the contract. His mouth had gone dry. Ms. Choi, if this is about if I did something to the papers in the litigation room, I can explain I never meant to. 3 o'clock, Mr. Turner. Main boardroom, 45th floor. Ms. Langford does not like to be kept waiting. A pause. I'd wear something nice if I were you. The line went dead. Malik sat on the edge of his bed in the dark, the phone still pressed to his ear, listening to nothing. His heart was slamming against his ribs. 4 years. 4 years of being careful, of being invisible, of doing everything right, so that exactly this would never happen. And in one reckless moment, with a pencil in his hand, he'd thrown it all away. They were going to fire him. Of course they were going to fire him. You didn't get summoned to the CEO's boardroom to be congratulated. You got summoned to be made an example of. And a man in his position with a child to feed and no other income and no cushion between him and the street could not survive being fired. Not with the winter heating bill overdue. Not with Zoe needing new shoes and the rent due in 9 days. He thought about calling in sick. About not going. About packing Zoe up and disappearing before 3 o'clock came. And then he thought about Danielle. You didn't write those words because you were reckless, her voice said in his mind, clear as if she were sitting beside him. You wrote them because they were true. Since when do we run from the truth? Malik Turner, he put down the phone. He stood up, and he walked to the closet to the very back, where behind the gray uniforms and the work clothes hung one suit. A charcoal suit 4 years out of fashion that he had not worn since the last day he'd walked out of a law firm as a lawyer. He'd almost sold it a dozen times. Somehow, he never had. Malik took it off the hanger and laid it on the bed. Whatever was waiting for him at 3 o'clock, whatever they were going to do to him in that boardroom, he was not going to walk in there as a ghost. He was going to walk in as the man Danielle had married. The man who could read what the words were afraid to say. He didn't know it yet, but that decision, the suit, the refusal to run, the choice to walk in as himself, was the hinge on which his entire life was about to turn. At 2:45, he stood in the lobby of his own workplace and felt like a stranger. He'd taken the bus downtown, sitting stiff and careful so as not to wrinkle the suit, and now he stood on the polished marble floor. He had cleaned 100 times, waiting for an elevator. He had only ever ridden in the service shaft. The security guard at the desk, Ramirez, a decent enough man on the day shift, didn't recognize him at first. Looked right past the well-dressed black man in the charcoal suit, then did a double take. Malik, that you? It's me. Ramirez's eyes moved over the suit, confused. You off the schedule tonight? Why you all dressed? Ms. Langford asked to see me. The guard's eyebrows shot up. He knew what that meant, or thought he did, and something like sympathy crossed his face. Aw, man. Hey. Whatever it is, I hope it works out. He hesitated. You want me to walk you up? I know the way, Malik said quietly. But thank you, Ray. That means something. He rode the executive elevator up alone, watching the numbers climb, his reflection warped in the brushed steel doors. 41, 42, 43, 44, the litigation floor where this had all begun. 45. The doors opened onto the executive level, and Sandra Choi was waiting, a sleek woman with a clipboard and an unreadable face. Her eyes flicked over his suit with what might have been surprise. Mr. Turner, this way. She led him down a corridor, lined with abstract art that probably cost more than his life. His footsteps felt loud, his collar felt too tight, and as they approached the frosted glass doors of the main boardroom, he could hear voices on the other side, many voices, a full room laughter, and his stomach turned over. It wasn't a firing. Firings were done quietly in small rooms with an HR representative and a box of tissues. This was something else. This was a crowd. Sandra Choi paused with her hand on the door. She looked at him for a moment, and for just a second, something flickered in her professional mask. Not quite pity, not quite warning. Something in between. Whatever happens in there, she said very low. She respects 2 things. She told me that once. Money and people who don't flinch. She pushed the door open. "Try not to flinch, Mr. Turner." And Malik Turner stepped into the boardroom. The room fell silent by degrees the way a wave pulls back before it crashes. 20-some executives around a table longer than his living room. Marcus Webb, the chief legal officer, arms crossed. A whole row of lawyers he half recognized from the floors he cleaned. Chad Bellamy, smirking already. And at the head of the table, in a chair that seemed to belong to her, the way a throne belongs to a Queen Victoria Langford. She was older than he'd expected. 60, maybe silver-haired, sharp-eyed, dressed in a gray so dark it was almost black. She looked at Malik with an intensity that made him feel like glass, like she could see straight through the suit, through the 4 years of custodial work, through everything all the way down to the man reading French at midnight with a pencil in his hand. "Mr. Turner," she said. Her voice carried without effort. "Do you know why you're here?" Every eye in the room was on him. He could feel them cataloging the suit, the skin, the wrongness of a janitor standing in a boardroom. He could feel the room already deciding what he was. Malik thought about Zoe. He thought about Danielle. He thought about the bravest girl he knew, and about a woman who had taught him that the truth was worth being brave for. He did not flinch. "No, ma'am," he said, his voice steady and clear. "But I have a feeling you're about to tell me." And somewhere behind those cold, appraising eyes, Victoria Langford smiled. "No," Victoria said. "I don't imagine you do. Sit down, Mr. Turner." There was one empty chair. It had been placed deliberately at the far end of the table, the end opposite hers, the loneliest seat in the room, the seat where everyone would have to turn to look at him. Malik understood the geometry of it immediately. This was a stage, and someone had set it for him. He crossed the room. He was aware of every step. Aware of Chad Bellamy, leaning to whisper something to the man beside him, aware of the smirks and the raised eyebrows, and the particular quality of the silence that follows a person who does not belong. He pulled out the chair. He sat. He folded his hands on the table in front of him, and he waited. "Before we begin," Victoria said, "I want everyone in this room to look at this man, really look at him, because most of you have walked past him 100 times and never once seen him." She let that sit. "His name is Malik Turner. He has cleaned the floors of this building for 4 years. Some of you have stepped over him. One of you," and here her eyes found Chad, who went suddenly pale, "stepped over him last night, literally. I watched you do it." Chad opened his mouth, closed it. "Ms. Langford." Marcus Webb said, "With respect, I've cleared my afternoon and half the legal divisions for a meeting you called urgent. If this is about workplace conduct, HR." "Sit down, Marcus. This is very much about the legal division." Victoria reached to the table beside her and lifted a stack of papers. Malik recognized them at once, and his stomach dropped. The Beaumont contract, and on the top page visible even from across the room the pencil marks. His pencil marks. "Last night," Victoria continued, "at approximately 12:30 in the morning, this man was cleaning the litigation conference room. He came across the Beaumont acquisition documents which someone, a glance at Marcus, had left out overnight. And he did something interesting. He read them." She turned the top page toward the room. "And then he corrected them." A ripple went through the executives. Someone laughed a short disbelieving bark. "He corrected the contract," Chad said, recovering his nerve. "The janitor edited a $100 million deal. What did he do? Spell check it." The laughter came easier now, spreading around the table, and Malik felt it land on him like it always did, that particular heat in the face, the pressure behind the eyes. He kept his hands folded. He kept his breathing even. He did not flinch. Victoria did not laugh. She waited cold and patient until the laughter died of its own embarrassment. "Marcus," she said, "your team's translation of the jurisdiction clause. You told me this morning it was clean. 11 people reviewed it. Delacroix himself, your best French lawman. Vague, flexible language. Jurisdiction of the applicable courts. Correct." Marcus straightened. "Correct." "Mr. Turner." Victoria's eyes swung down the table to Malik. You wrote 2 words next to that clause. Would you read them to the room? Malik's mouth was dry. He could feel the whole weight of the boardroom pressing down on him, 20-some pairs of eyes. The smirks, the contempt, the absolute certainty that whatever he was about to say would be foolish. For a moment, the old instinct rose up in him. Disappear. Apologize. Shrink. Make yourself small enough to survive. And then he thought of Danielle at their kitchen table tapping a page. This one's lying. I wrote, Malik said, and his voice came out steadier than he felt. This is wrong. The room went quiet in a different way now. Wrong how? Victoria said. The translation. Malik looked down the long table past all the hostile faces to the papers in her hands. The French clause doesn't say applicable courts. It says compétence exclusive des tribunaux français. Exclusive jurisdiction of the French courts. There's no flexibility in it. There's no wherever's most favorable. If this deal goes bad, and a deal this size you have to assume it might, you don't get to fight it in an American courtroom under American law. You get pulled into France, French court, French law. On their ground playing by their rules. He paused. That's not the same contract your team thinks they signed. It's the opposite of it. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Marcus Webb laughed, and it was an ugly defensive sound. This is absurd. Ms. Langford, you dragged the entire executive board in here to listen to a custodian lecture us on French contract law. Delacroix has 3 degrees. He clerked at the Cour de Cassation. He's been practicing French commercial law for 20 years. And you want us to believe the man who empties our trash caught something he missed. I want us to check, Victoria said. There's nothing to check. The translation is standard boilerplate. Tribunaux français in context obviously refers to the applicable forum. It's a term of... No, it doesn't, Malik said quietly. The room turned to him again. Tribunaux français doesn't mean applicable forum. It means French courts, specifically, by name. There's no context in the world that turns French courts into whatever courts you'd prefer. He was not looking at the papers anymore. He didn't need to. He'd read it once, and it was carved into him. And it's worse than that. The word exclusive isn't decorative. In French commercial contracts, competence exclusive is a bright line. It removes every other option. Your team translated a locked door as an open field. If you sign that Friday and this deal ever sours, you'll spend the next 5 years and $30 million trying to litigate in a country whose courts have already been told in writing in your own contract that you agreed to fight there and nowhere else. Marcus's face had gone from red to something paler. You're guessing. You read a phrase and you're guessing. I'm not guessing. Malik met his eyes. I've read this kind of clause before. I've argued about this kind of clause before. In rooms not too different from this one. And where was that exactly? Which trash can did you find your legal education in? It was cruel, and it was meant to be, and the room tittered, and Malik felt the old shame rise. But he'd made a decision in that closet holding the charcoal suit. He was done shrinking. Howard University, he said. International law. And then 3 years at Ashford and Vane, where I did contract review on deals larger than this one. He let it sit. You can look it up, Mr. Webb. It's in the file your CEO is holding if she pulled the whole thing, which I'm guessing she did or none of us would be here. The silence that followed was total. Marcus Webb's mouth was slightly open. Chad Bellamy's smirk had frozen and cracked, and around the long table, 20-some faces were rearranging themselves slowly, painfully, from contempt into confusion. Because the story they'd been told when they walked in, the janitor, the joke the circus had just developed a fault line running straight through it. Victoria Langford watched all of it with the flat, pleased attention of a woman watching a trap spring exactly the way she'd built it. Ashford and Vane, she said. That's true, Marcus. I read his file at 4 o'clock this morning. Law degree, clerkship, 3 years of practice at one of the best international firms in the country. She set the contract down. And then 4 years ago, nothing. He walked out of that world and into this building with a mop in his hand, and he never told a single one of you who he was. Then why? Marcus said, and his voice had lost its edge, gone thin and grasping. Why is he cleaning floors? If he's such a brilliant lawyer, why? That, Malik said, is none of your business. He said it quietly, but it cut through the room like a blade, because there was something underneath it, a grief so vast and so private that everyone in that boardroom, even the cruelest of them, felt the edge of it and drew back. Marcus Webb closed his mouth. Victoria studied Malik for a long moment. She had built her fortune on finding the pressure point in people, the soft place that told you what they truly wanted and what they were truly afraid of. And she had just watched a man refuse to show her his. It intrigued her more than any answer could have. "All right," she said. "Then let's not talk about the past. Let's talk about right now." She stood. She had a way of standing that made the whole room orient toward her, a gravity that 4 decades of being the most dangerous person in every room had refined to an instrument. "Mr. Turner has made a claim. He says my legal team, 11 people, one of them the best French law attorney in this city, botched a critical clause in a $100 million contract. Marcus says he's wrong. So." She spread her hands. "Let's find out." She turned to Sandra Choi, hovering by the door. "Sandra, in my safe there's a sealed envelope. Gray. Beaumont's counter-proposal, the one that came in last week that we haven't distributed yet. Bring it." Marcus went rigid. "Victoria, that's the confidential counter. Nobody's reviewed it yet, not even Delacroix. It came in French, we were going to have it." "I know what it is, Marcus. That's the point." She looked down the table at Malik. "Nobody in this room has seen this document. Not you, not me, not my very expensive lawyers. It's a fresh French legal contract, 40 pages straight from Beaumont's attorneys in Paris. Complex, adversarial, full of exactly the kind of buried clauses your late—" She caught herself. "Your kind of clauses. And I'm going to give it to you cold, Mr. Turner, in front of all these people. And I'm going to give you 30 minutes. The room had gone electric. 30 minutes, Victoria said, to read it, translate the material terms, and tell me what's in it that my lawyers would miss. If you can do that, if you can stand in this room and read a document my team hasn't even cracked and show me it's real. That last night wasn't a fluke, that you are what your file says you are, and not just a man who got lucky with one clause." She paused, and the whole boardroom held its breath. "Then I will pay you $3 million, cash, today." Somebody gasped. Chad Bellamy said, $3 million for you, and choked on it. "And if he can't," Marcus said. Victoria smiled. "Then you all get to watch the janitor fail, and Marcus gets to feel very good about his 11-person team, and Mr. Turner goes back to his cart, and we never speak of this again." She looked at Malik. "That's the bet. $3 million in front of everyone that a single father who cleans floors can read a sealed French contract that my entire legal division hasn't touched. The whole room thinks it's a circus." Her eyes glinted. "I think it might be the smartest $3 million I ever spend. What do you say, Mr. Turner?" And there it was. Malik sat at the end of the long table with his hands folded and understood exactly what was happening to him. He was being used. He was a prop in a war. Victoria Langford was waging against her own arrogant lawyers, a lesson she wanted to teach Marcus Webb, a spectacle. Win or lose, she got what she wanted. Either her team was humbled, or the janitor was, and either way, Victoria Langford was proven the smartest person in the room, which was the only thing that woman had ever truly wanted. He should say no. $3 million was a fantasy, a carrot she was dangling to make the humiliation sweeter. Nobody was going to hand a janitor $3 million. If he failed, and 40 pages of adversarial French legal text in 30 minutes cold was a task that would make even Danielle sweat, he'd be the joke he was already being treated as, and he'd carry it back down to the service floors forever. And if by some miracle he succeeded, he'd have exposed himself, completely made an enemy of Marcus Webb and every lawyer whose incompetence he'd shown in a company where he still needed his paycheck to feed his child. Every instinct he'd spent 4 years building screamed at him to shrink. To say, "I'm sorry, ma'am, I spoke out of turn, I'm just the cleaner." To make himself invisible again and slip out the door. And then in the silence, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He didn't take it out. He couldn't not there. But he knew who it was, the summer program sending the afternoon photo they sent every day. Zoe with paint on her hands or a book in her lap. Zoe who asked, "Are we going to be okay?" more than a 7-year-old should have to. Zoe whose mother had taught him that the truth was worth being brave for. Since when do we run from the truth? Malik Turner. He looked up the long table at Victoria Langford. And for the first time since he'd walked into the building 4 years ago, Malik Turner stopped being invisible on purpose. "I have a question first," he said. Victoria raised an eyebrow. "Ask it. You said cash. Today. In front of everyone." He held her gaze. "I've been in enough rooms to know that a promise made in front of witnesses is a different thing than a promise made in private. So I want to be clear, and I want everyone here to hear me be clear. If I do this, if I read your contract and I'm right, this isn't a tip. It isn't charity. It isn't the rich lady giving the poor man a little something for the trouble. It's a debt. You'll owe it, and you'll pay it, and it'll be in writing before I read a single word." Marcus Webb made a scandalized noise. "You don't dictate terms to—" "It's fine," Victoria said. And she was looking at Malik now with something that had moved past intrigue into something warmer and more dangerous recognition. "Sandra, draw up a 1-page memorandum. $3 million payable to Malik Turner upon successful demonstration terms as stated witnessed by everyone in this room. Have it on the table before he starts." She almost smiled. "You don't flinch, Mr. Turner. I told Sandra there were 2 things I respected. It appears you have both." "I don't want your respect," Malik said. "I want the money to be real. My daughter needs shoes." It landed in the room like a stone in still water. My daughter needs shoes. Not a demand for millions. Not greed. A father stating a fact. And around that long table, some of the smirks finally permanently died, because you could laugh at a janitor, but it was harder to laugh at a man who'd just told you plainly in a room full of people worth billions that his child needed shoes. Sandra Choi returned with 2 things, the gray sealed envelope and a freshly printed page that she set in front of Victoria to sign. Victoria signed it without reading it, which told Malik everything about how sure she was, or how little $3 million meant to her, and passed it down the table hand to hand until it reached him. He read it. It was clean, simple, real. He set it aside. Then Sandra placed the gray envelope in front of him. It was heavier than he expected. Somewhere inside it were 40 pages of French legal text that no one in this building had read 40 pages of an adversary's carefully constructed traps and 30 minutes on the clock, and $3 million, and his dignity, and his daughter's shoes, and the ghost of the only woman who had ever believed he could do exactly this. "When you open that envelope," Victoria said, "the clock starts. 30 minutes. Marcus, get Delacroix on the video screen. I want our best French lawman watching this in real time, and I want him ready to tell me the second Mr. Turner makes a mistake." She sat back down in her throne. "Any questions?" "One more," Malik said. "Of course you have one more. When I'm right." He chose the word deliberately when not if, and watched it register on her face. "And your team missed things they should have caught what happens to them." Victoria tilted her head. "Why do you care?" "Because I've been the person who got let go from a firm," Malik said quietly. "And I know what it does to a man's family. So before I stand up here and show you every place these people failed, and I will, if it's there, I won't soften it. I want to know I'm not putting anyone's kids on the street to save my own. That's not a trade I'll make, not even for $3 million. The room was silent. And Victoria Langford, who had built an empire on humiliating employees to test their loyalty, who had never once in 40 years met a person who worried about the jobs of strangers, while $3 million sat in front of them, looked at the janitor at the end of her table as though she were seeing him for the very first time. "Nobody loses their job today," she said, and Malik could hear that she meant it and that it surprised her to mean it. "You have my word? In front of everyone." "Then we have a deal," Malik said. He put his hand on the envelope. Across the room on the wide video screen, a face had appeared, Delacroix joining from wherever he was, a lean, silver-haired man with the professional smugness of someone who had been told a janitor was about to embarrass himself and had cleared his schedule to enjoy it. Marcus Webb stood at the head of the table with his arms crossed, radiating certainty. Chad Bellamy leaned forward, hungry for the failure. 20-some executives waited for the circus to begin, and Sandra Choi by the door mouthed something at Malik that only he could see. "Don't flinch." Malik thought about Danielle. He thought about the kitchen table and the wild animals that were words and the knife hidden in the sleeve. He thought about, "Are we going to be okay? And we're going to be okay, you and me always." "Ready when you are, Mr. Turner," Victoria said. "Open it." He broke the seal. The paper inside was heavy cream-colored dense, with the particular formatting of French legal drafting. Long sentences, nested clauses, the elaborate courtesy that French law wraps around its cruelties. Malik slid the pages out and laid them flat, and for one terrible second, the text swam in front of him. 4 years of rust rising up, and he thought, "I can't. It's been too long. I've forgotten how. Too long." And then his eyes caught on the first substantive clause, and something clicked into place, and the rust fell away like it had never been there at all. Because he hadn't forgotten. You didn't forget the thing your wife had spent 6 years teaching you at a kitchen table. You didn't forget the shape of her hands moving across a page the way she'd say, "Read it out loud." Malik, the truth hides better in silence. It was in him. It had always been in him. 4 years of pushing a cart hadn't scrubbed it out. It had only buried it, and now it was surfacing clause by clause, like a language he'd only pretended to forget. "The clock's running," Victoria said softly. 29 minutes. Malik didn't look up. He read. Fast now, his finger tracking down the margins, his lips moving slightly, and the executives watched him read a language none of them understood and felt the strange discomfort of being unable to laugh at something they didn't understand. 2 minutes in, he made a small sound. A quiet, "Something funny," Marcus said. Malik held up one finger. "Wait," and kept reading. 3 minutes. 4. His finger stopped on page 6, went back up 2 paragraphs, came back down. The HM again louder. "Mr. Turner," Victoria said, "you have 25 minutes and you're making noises. I'd prefer words." Malik looked up. "Your adversary," he said slowly, "is very good. Whoever drafted this for Beaumont is genuinely excellent. This is the best hidden trap I've seen in a long time." He looked back at the page, then up again, and there was something in his face now that hadn't been there when he'd walked in a focus, a fire. A man returning to the thing he was made for. "Can I stand, I think, better on my feet?" "Old habit." Victoria gestured. "Be my guest." Malik stood. He picked up the pages. And when he spoke again, his voice had changed, steadier, surer, the voice of a man who had once stood in front of judges. On the surface, he said, "This counter-proposal looks like a concession." Beaumont's lowered the price, 2 points off the acquisition figure. If your team saw this cold, the first thing they'd feel is relief. The other side blinked. They're giving ground. Let's sign before they change their minds. He turned a page. That's the bait. That's what they want you to see. The 2 points off the top is a gift wrapped around a knife. "What knife?" Marcus said. It wasn't a challenge anymore. It was a question. Page 11. There's a clause on the transfer of liabilities that's written to look like standard indemnification language. It's not. Malik's finger found the spot. In English, the way your team would probably translate it in a hurry, it reads like Beaumont's accepting responsibility for any environmental liabilities that predate the acquisition, which is exactly what you'd want. That's the whole reason you're buying carefully those old energy sites, the cleanup exposure. That's the risk that could sink the whole deal. He looked up. But that's not what it says. The French uses a phrase dans la mesure du raisonnable, to the extent reasonable. It's tucked into the middle of a very long sentence, right where your eye slides past it. And it changes everything. Because, to the extent reasonable, means Beaumont decides what's reasonable. They accept the liability, and then, in the same breath and language, you'd skim right over. They give themselves the sole right to define how much of it they'll actually honor. The room was dead silent. On the screen, Delacroix had stopped smiling. "So the 2 points they took off the price," Malik continued, "is nothing. It's pocket change compared to what they just clawed back on the environmental exposure. They're selling you a discount and buying themselves an escape hatch, and they buried the escape hatch in 5 words in the middle of a sentence on page 11 in a clause that's mislabeled to make you file it under boilerplate and stop reading." He set the page down. "Your team would have caught the price change and celebrated, and they'd have signed away 30, 40, maybe 50 million in liability protection without ever knowing it was gone. That's the trap, and it's a beautiful one. My compliments to whoever built it." For a long moment, nobody in the boardroom breathed. Then Marcus Webb turned slowly to the screen. "Delacroix. Is he right?" And Delacroix, the best French lawman in the city. The man who'd cleared his schedule to watch a janitor fail looked down at his own copy of the document at page 11 at the 5 words buried in the middle of a long sentence, and his silence was the loudest thing that had ever happened in that room. "Delacroix," Victoria said. "Answer him." Delacroix's voice, when it came, was quiet and shaken. "Dans la mesure du raisonnable. Yes. Yes, I would need to review it fully, but the placement, the labeling, yes. That's a discretionary carve-out. He's..." A pause. "He's reading it correctly." The room erupted. Not in laughter now. In a low, urgent murmur of 24 powerful people realizing all at once that the joke they'd walked in to enjoy had turned somewhere in the last 20 minutes into something else entirely. And Malik Turner, standing at the end of the long table in a 4-year-old charcoal suit, looked down at the pages in his hands and thought 20 minutes left. He'd only just begun. "There's more," he said, and the room went quiet again, hanging now on his every word. "That was page 11. You've still got 29 pages, and I've got 20 minutes, and I promise you, Ms. Langford." He looked up at Victoria, and for the first time since he'd walked in, there was the faintest ghost of his old courtroom fire in his eyes. Page 11 is not the only place they hid a knife. Victoria Langford leaned forward in her chair, and her voice when she spoke was almost a whisper. "Then keep reading, Mr. Turner," she said. "Keep reading." Malik turned to page 14 and the room turned with him. He could feel the shift in the air the way you can feel a storm change direction. 20 minutes ago, these people had walked in ready to watch a janitor humiliate himself. Now they were leaning forward. Now Marcus Webb had uncrossed his arms. Now the smirk was gone from Chad Bellamy's face, and something closer to fear had replaced it because Chad was a junior associate, and Chad had signed off on the first review of this deal, and Chad was beginning to understand that whatever the janitor found in the next 20 pages might have his fingerprints on it. "Before I keep going," Malik said, "I want to say something, and I want the record to show I said it before I found the rest." He set the pages down flat on the table. "The people who reviewed the first draft of this deal didn't fail because they're stupid. I've read enough of your team's work in the trash." A few uncomfortable laughs. "Yes, I read what you throw away. I've been reading it for 4 years and most of it is good. This isn't a story about incompetent lawyers. This is a story about a very smart adversary who knows exactly how American firms read French contracts. He knows you read for the numbers and skim the language. He knows you trust your translators to flag the traps, and your translators are translating for accuracy, not for malice. So he hides the malice in accurate translations." He looked around the table. "That's why nobody caught it. Not because you're fools, because he's a surgeon, and he's operating on the exact blind spot that every firm in this country shares." "You're being generous," Victoria said. "Why? Because it's true." Malik picked the pages back up. "And because I told you nobody loses their job today, and I meant that too. Now let me show you page 14. He found the clause. His finger stopped and his brow furrowed, and the HM came again, but darker this time. "This one," he said slowly, "is worse than page 11. "Worse how?" Marcus said. His voice had lost every trace of the arrogance it had carried an hour ago. He sounded now like a man who badly needed to hear an answer. "Page 11 was about money. You'd lose money, but money's survivable. This..." Malik tapped the page. "This is about control. There's a clause here on governance. Post-acquisition governance, the structure of the joint board that'll run the combined operation once the deal closes. On the surface, it reads like a standard 50-50 arrangement. Equal seats, equal votes. A deadlock resolution mechanism that looks fair. If your team saw this, they'd approve it in about 90 seconds because it's exactly what a fair governance clause is supposed to look like. But, Victoria said, but there's a subclause. Alinea quatra, subparagraph 4. Malik's voice dropped the way a man's voice drops when he's found something that genuinely worries him. It defines what happens in the event of a deadlock on any question stratégique, any strategic question. And the definition of what counts as a strategic question is written to be enormous. Pricing, personnel, market entry, capital allocation. Basically anything that matters. And when there's a deadlock on a strategic question, the clause says the tie is broken by... He read the French silently, then translated. The chairman of the founding entity's supervisory council. He looked up. That's Beaumont. That's their guy. Always. In perpetuity. They've written a 50-50 deal where they own the tiebreaker on every decision that matters forever, and they've buried the definition of the tiebreaker 3 subclauses deep in a governance section that looks completely balanced on its face. The room made a sound, not laughter, a kind of collective intake of breath. So you wouldn't be buying half a company, Malik said. You'd be paying $100 million for the appearance of buying half a company while Beaumont keeps effective control of everything that generates value. You'd own the losses, they'd own the wheel, and you'd have signed it yourselves, celebrating the 2 points you saved on the purchase price, never knowing that on page 14 in Alinea Quatra, they took the whole company back. Delacroix, Marcus said, and his voice cracked on the name. Delacroix, tell me he's wrong. Tell me he's misreading it. On the screen, Delacroix had his own copy open. He was reading page 14. And the silence stretched and became unbearable, and everyone in the room understood what the silence meant before Delacroix said a single word. He's not misreading it, Delacroix said finally. His voice was hollow. The definition of question stratégique, I flagged it as broad, I noted it, but I read the tiebreaker as procedural. I didn't. He stopped. I didn't connect the two. The way he's connecting them. The breadth of the definition combined with the founding entity tiebreaker. That's a long pause. That's a control mechanism. Yes, he's right. My God, he's right. Marcus Webb sat down heavily in his chair, as though his legs had stopped working. 12 minutes, Victoria said quietly. But she wasn't looking at the clock. She was looking at Malik with an expression that had traveled somewhere far past intrigue, somewhere she clearly hadn't expected to go when she'd set this trap that morning. Keep reading, Mr. Turner, please. Please. Malik registered it. Victoria Langford had said please to the janitor. He kept reading. Page 17 gave him a payment timing clause that quietly shifted $40 million of risk onto Langford's balance sheet in the 90-day window between signing and closing. Page 22 hid an intellectual property provision that would have handed Beaumont a perpetual royalty-free license to technology that was supposed to stay proprietary to Langford. Each one he found, he laid out clearly, plainly, without gloating the French, the mistranslation, or the omission, the consequence in dollars, and control the reason a smart team had missed it. And each time Marcus turned to the screen, and each time Delacroix's silence answered before his words did, and each time the mood in the boardroom sank lower from disbelief into something like grief. Because these people were beginning to understand what they had almost done. They had been 6 weeks and 1 signature away from closing a deal that would have cost their company hundreds of millions of dollars and effective control of a major acquisition. And the only reason they weren't going to the only thing standing between Langford Global and a catastrophe that would have made the financial papers for all the wrong reasons was a man they'd stepped over in the hallway. A man whose name they'd never learned. A man who'd been emptying their trash for 4 years while carrying unused and unseen exactly the mind that could save them. 4 minutes, Victoria said. Malik was on page 31, and he stopped. Not the HM this time. Something else. His whole body went still, and his face changed, and for a moment he wasn't in the boardroom at all. He was somewhere else. Someone in the room said Mr. Turner, but he didn't hear it. Because on page 31, in the definition section, in a clause about the language of interpretation, the boilerplate clause that specified which language would govern if the French and English versions of the contract ever conflicted, Malik had found something that stopped his heart. It was a phrase. A specific, unusual phrase. La langue fait foi. The language prevails. It was a construction Danielle had shown him once, years ago at their kitchen table, on a contract she was fighting for a client, and she had gotten so angry about it, so beautifully, righteously angry, because it was, she said, the single most dishonest clause in international law. They put it at the very end, she'd told him, jabbing the page with her pen, where nobody reads, and they make the foreign language the one that governs. And then they mistranslate the English on purpose, so the version you signed and the version that binds you are two different documents. It's legal fraud Malik dressed up as a formality. And 9 out of 10 firms sign it without blinking because it's the last page and everybody's tired. And here it was, on page 31. The last substantive clause of a 40-page contract. La langue fait foi. French prevails. Which meant that every single mistranslation Malik had just uncovered, page 11, page 14, page 17, page 22, wasn't an accident to be corrected in the English draft. It was the whole design. Beaumont had written a contract where the harmless English translation was the bait, and the French, the real French with all its buried knives, was the version that would actually bind Langford in court. They'd built a document that said one thing to the men who signed it, and another thing entirely to the judge who'd enforce it, and they'd sealed the trap with a single clause on the last page that nobody was supposed to read. Malik stood there with the page in his hands, and his eyes were suddenly wet, and it had nothing to do with the contract. Because he could hear her, Danielle, sitting at the kitchen table 7 years gone, jabbing a page with her pen. They put it at the very end where nobody reads. He could hear her voice so clearly. It was as if she were standing beside him, and the grief of it, and the impossible gift of it, hit him at the same time that the very last thing she had ever taught him, the clause she'd been angriest about in her whole life, was the clause that was about to save this company and change his and Zoe's lives forever. Mr. Turner. Victoria's voice gentle now, uncertain. Are you all right? You have 2 minutes. Malik wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. He didn't try to hide it. Let them see. Let them all see. I'm fine, he said, and his voice was thick. My wife showed me this clause, a long time ago. She's the reason I can read it. He steadied himself. Page 31. There's a language governance clause. It says that if the French and English versions of this contract ever conflict, the French version prevails. La langue fait foi. That's standard, Delacroix said from the screen, almost desperate to have found something normal. That's a completely standard interpretation clause. It's in half of all bilingual. I know it's standard, Malik said. That's what makes it perfect. That's the whole trick. He looked up and his voice grew stronger, and the tears were still on his face, but his eyes were burning now. Because every single thing I just found, the environmental carve-out on page 11, the control mechanism on page 14, the risk shift on 17, the IP giveaway on 22. Every one of those is in the French, the real French. And every one of them is softened or hidden or mistranslated in the English draft your team was working from. And you all thought that was sloppy translation. It's not sloppy. It's the design. He set the page down. They gave you a beautiful, clean, favorable English contract to read and celebrate and sign. And then on the last page where everyone's tired and nobody's reading, they told you in the smallest, most standard-looking language they could find that the English you signed doesn't matter. The French governs, and the French is a completely different contract. You'd have signed a deal in English and been bound by a deal in French, and you'd never have known the two weren't the same until you were standing in a courtroom in Paris 5 years from now, wondering how you lost everything. The boardroom was utterly, absolutely silent. That, Malik said quietly, is the knife. Everything else was the sleeve. This clause on page 31 is the knife, and it's pointed straight at your heart. And if I hadn't stopped to read the last page, if I'd been tired, if I'd been rushing, if I'd trusted the English like your team did, I'd have missed it too. Everybody misses the last page. That's why they put it there. Nobody spoke. On the screen, Delacroix had gone white as paper. Marcus Webb was staring at the table as though he might be sick. And Victoria Langford was sitting very, very still, her eyes fixed on Malik, her mind visibly racing behind them. "Time," Sandra Choi said softly from the door. "That's 30 minutes." Malik set down the pages. His hands were shaking just slightly. He'd done it. 40 pages cold in 30 minutes, and he'd found not just the traps, but the master trap that made all the others lethal. The one clause that turned 4 hidden knives into a killing blow. He'd done the thing. Victoria said couldn't be done, the thing every person in that room had walked in, certain he would fail. He'd done it. And then Delacroix spoke, and Delacroix made a mistake. Maybe it was wounded pride. Maybe it was 4 decades of being the smartest man in every room he entered, unable to bear that the smartest man in this one was a janitor. Maybe it was just the reflexive cruelty of a cornered expert. But Delacroix leaned toward his camera, and he switched into rapid dismissive French, the language of his own authority, the language he assumed no one else in that room could follow. And he said fast and contemptuous to Marcus, "Écoutez, il a peut-être lu quelques clauses, mais il ne comprend pas le fond. Un homme comme lui, un concierge, il récite des mots. Il ne connaît pas le droit. Ne le laissez pas vous impressionner. C'est un perroquet, pas un juriste." Listen, he may have read a few clauses, but he doesn't understand the substance. A man like him, a janitor, he's reciting words. He doesn't know the law. Don't let him impress you. He's a parrot, not a lawyer. Delacroix sat back satisfied, certain that the janitor and the Americans in the room had understood none of it, that he'd salvaged some scrap of his authority in a language they couldn't touch. The room, which didn't speak French, looked confused. Marcus, who spoke a little, looked embarrassed. And Malik Turner very slowly turned to face the screen. When he spoke, it was in French. Not the careful textbook French of a man reciting from memory. Fluent French. Fast, precise, effortless French. The French of a man who had spent 6 years married to a woman who spoke 5 languages, and who had insisted they speak French at the dinner table twice a week so their daughter would grow up bilingual. It poured out of him, and every executive in that room who didn't understand a word of it understood instantly and completely exactly what was happening, because they watched Delacroix's face fall apart in real time. "Un perroquet," Malik said, and his voice was calm and terrible. "Vous m'appelez un perroquet, maître Delacroix." Un perroquet répète sans comprendre. Alors dites-moi, est-ce un perroquet qui a trouvé la clause de compétence exclusive que vous avez traduite comme tribunaux applicables? Est-ce un perroquet qui a vu la carve-out environnementale à la page 11 que vous avez laissé passer? Est-ce un perroquet qui a compris que la langue fait foi à la page 31 transforme chaque erreur de traduction en piège juridique délibéré? Vous avez 3 diplômes. Vous avez fait votre stage à la Cour de cassation. Et vous n'avez pas lu la dernière page. A parrot. You call me a parrot, Maître Delacroix. A parrot repeats without understanding. So tell me, was it a parrot who found the exclusive jurisdiction clause you translated as applicable courts? Was it a parrot who saw the environmental carve-out on page 11, the one you let slip past? Was it a parrot who understood that the language prevails on page 31 turns every translation error into a deliberate legal trap? You have 3 degrees. You did your clerkship at the Cour de cassation. And you did not read the last page. He paused. Delacroix's mouth was open. He couldn't speak. Je ne suis pas un juriste. Malik continued. And now something entered his voice that hadn't been there before. Not anger exactly, but a deep and ancient dignity. The dignity of a man who had swallowed 4 years of being made invisible and was finally done swallowing it. J'ai plaidé des contrats plus gros que celui-ci pendant que vous rédigiez des notes de bas de page. J'ai perdu mon métier. J'ai perdu ma femme. J'ai nettoyé vos planchers pendant 4 ans pendant que des hommes comme vous m'enjambaient dans les couloirs. Mais je n'ai jamais oublié comment lire ce qu'un contrat a peur de dire. Vous m'appelez concierge comme si c'était une insulte. Ma femme m'appelait l'homme le plus intelligent qu'elle connaissait. Je préfère son mot au vôtre. I'm not a lawyer. I argued contracts bigger than this one while you were drafting footnotes. I lost my profession. I lost my wife. I cleaned your floors for 4 years while men like you stepped over me in the hallways. But I never forgot how to read what a contract is afraid to say. You call me a janitor as if it's an insult. My wife called me the smartest man she knew. I prefer her word to yours. The silence that followed was the loudest silence any of them had ever heard. Then Malik switched back to English, and he spoke to the room, and his voice was quiet again, gentle again, the voice of a tired father who just wanted to go home. Maitre Delacroix just told Mr. Webb in French that I'm a parrot, he said, that I recite words without understanding them, that a man like me, a janitor, can't possibly know the law. He assumed none of you spoke French, so he could insult me safely. A small, sad smile. I just answered him, in French. And I don't think he has anything left to say. He didn't. Delacroix's face on the screen was the face of a man watching his own reputation die in real time. He reached forward, and the screen went black. He had disconnected, fled, unable to sit in that silence 1 second longer. And the boardroom of Langford Global Holdings, 20-some of the most powerful people in the city, sat frozen around a long table, staring at a man in a 4-year-old charcoal suit, who had just in the space of 31 minutes exposed a $100 million trap that 11 lawyers had missed, saved the company from catastrophe, and dismantled the smartest French attorney in the city in his own native language. Chad Bellamy was the first to break. He stood up so fast his chair rolled back and hit the wall, and he said to no one, to everyone, I signed off on the first review. The initial read. I put my name on the initial read. I said it was clean. And then he seemed to realize he was speaking out loud in front of the CEO confessing, and he sat back down gray-faced. You did? Malik said, not unkindly. He turned to the young man who had stepped over him in the hallway not 24 hours ago. And you missed it, same as everyone. Same as I would have 4 years ago if my wife hadn't shown me that last-page clause on a Tuesday night at our kitchen table. He held Chad's eyes. It's not a character flaw, son. It's a blind spot. Everybody's got one. The difference is whether you learn it or whether you spend your whole life stepping over the people who could have taught you. Chad Bellamy, 26 years old, looked at the janitor he'd humiliated, and something in his face crumpled, and he said very quietly, I'm sorry. Last night. In the hallway. I'm sorry. Malik nodded. He didn't say it's okay because it wasn't. Not really 4 years of that wasn't okay. But he nodded, and it was enough, and Chad seemed to understand the mercy in it. Then Malik turned back to the head of the table to Victoria Langford, who had not moved, who had not spoken, who was looking at him with an expression he couldn't read. That was 30 minutes, Malik said. You said 30 minutes and $3 million if I was right. He gestured at the black screen where Delacroix had been. Your best French lawman just left the meeting rather than admit how right I was. So. He kept his voice steady, though everything in him was shaking now, the adrenaline draining out and leaving him hollow and exhausted, and suddenly desperately aware that this was the moment. This was the hinge. This was where he found out whether the promise made in front of witnesses was real, or whether it had all been a game. I believe you owe my daughter some shoes. For a long moment, Victoria Langford said nothing. Then she began to laugh. Not cruelly. Not the way the room had laughed at him an hour ago. She laughed the way a person laughs when they've been genuinely, thoroughly surprised by the world. For the first time in years, a real laugh startled out of her, and she put a hand to her chest and shook her head, and when she finally spoke, her voice was full of something that sounded almost like wonder. Shoes, she said. You just saved this company somewhere north of $200 million. You exposed my entire legal division as incapable of reading their own contracts. You made the best French attorney in the city hang up on a video call rather than face you, and you're asking me for shoes. She shook her head again. Marcus, look at me. Marcus Webb lifted his head. He looked like a man who had aged 10 years in 30 minutes. "I told you this morning I was going to teach my very expensive lawyers something about humility," Victoria said. "I'd say the lessons landed, wouldn't you?" "Yes," Marcus said. It came out as barely more than a whisper. "Victoria, the deal was going to close Friday. We were going to sign it Friday. If he hadn't—" He stopped. He couldn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. "If he hadn't read the papers we left out for the janitor to clean," Victoria finished for him. "Yes, that's the part I can't stop thinking about, Marcus. Do you understand what almost happened? Do you understand that the only reason we're not about to become the biggest cautionary tale in American finance is that we got lucky? That the one person in this entire building capable of catching this catastrophe happened to be the one person we pay the least respect, the least, and see the least." Her voice had gone cold and hard, and every lawyer in the room flinched under it. "I don't build my company on luck. I build it on knowing where the value is. And for 4 years, the most valuable mind in this building has been pushing a cart past your offices at midnight, and not one of you—" Her eyes swept the table. "Not one of you ever saw him." She turned back to Malik, and her whole manner changed. The cold left it. What replaced it was something Malik had not seen directed at him in 4 long years, not from anyone in a building like this. Respect. Real, unguarded respect. "Mr. Turner," Victoria Langford said, "you'll have your $3 million. Sandra will have the transfer initiated before you leave this floor, and I'll double-check it myself because I keep my promises in front of witnesses and I keep them in private. Your daughter will have her shoes." She paused. "But I don't think you understand yet what actually happened in this room. So let me be the one to tell you, since apparently I'm the only person here who was paying attention for the last 4 years." She stood. "You didn't win a bet today," she said. "You didn't do a trick. You showed 20 of the most powerful people in this city that everything they thought they knew about who's valuable and who's disposable, who belongs at this table and who belongs in the hallway, all of it, every assumption was wrong. And you did it in 31 minutes in a language most of them don't speak, in a suit that's 4 years out of style, while asking for nothing more than shoes for your kid." She came around the table slowly until she was standing in front of him, this billionaire and this janitor face to face at last. "I've spent 40 years looking for people who see what everyone else misses. Do you have any idea how rare you are?" Malik looked at her. He was so tired. He was so overwhelmed. And beneath all of it, underneath the exhaustion and the disbelief and the $3 million that his mind couldn't even hold yet, there was Danielle. There was always Danielle, and he could feel her in the room, the way he'd felt her when he read page 31, and he knew that wherever she was watching, and she was proud, and she was saying, "I told you, I always told you." "My wife knew," Malik said quietly. "She's the only one who ever did. Everything I just did in here, that was her. I was only ever repeating what she taught me." His voice broke just slightly. "So if I'm rare, ma'am, it's because I got to love the rarest person there ever was. And I lost her. And I've been trying to keep her alive the only way I know how, which is to remember every single thing she taught me." He looked around the silent room at Marcus and Chad and all the faces that had laughed at him and weren't laughing now. "You want to know why a lawyer was cleaning your floors? That's why. Because the person who made me a lawyer died, and I forgot how to be one, and cleaning floors was the only thing left that didn't hurt." He turned back to Victoria. "You didn't discover my intelligence today, Ms. Langford. You just stopped ignoring it. There's a difference. And I need you to know the difference, because there are people out there, a lot of them pushing carts past your office at midnight, and every single one of them is somebody's genius that the world decided not to see." The boardroom was silent, and Victoria Langford, $11 billion, 60 years old. The most feared woman in the city, looked at the janitor standing in front of her with tears drying on his face. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she found that she had absolutely nothing to say. It was Sandra Choi who finally broke the silence, stepping forward from the door with her tablet in hand. "Ms. Langford," she said quietly, "the transfer. You said before he left the floor. Do it now, Victoria said without taking her eyes off Malik. 3 million to whatever account Mr. Turner gives you. And Sandra, I want confirmation on my phone the second it clears. Not tomorrow. Now. Malik gave the account number in a voice that didn't sound like his own. It was the checking account he and Danielle had opened together the week they got married. The one that had once held their whole future and then held almost nothing. The one he'd watched drain to $9.40 on the worst night of his life. He recited the numbers from memory. He'd looked at that balance so many times so desperately that the routing number was carved into him deeper than his own address. Sandra typed. And a minute later, 1 minute in a room full of people who moved millions with a keystroke, her tablet chimed and she looked up. It's done, she said. It's cleared. Malik's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out with a hand that wouldn't hold steady, and there on the screen was a text from his bank. An automated alert, the kind he usually deleted without reading because it was always bad news. Always a low balance warning. Always the world reminding him how close to the edge he lived. Deposit posted $3 million. Available balance $3,247.63. He stared at it. $3 million and $247.63. The $247 was what he'd had before. Everything he'd had in the world before he broke that seal. And now there was a 3 and 6 zeros sitting on top of it, and his brain simply could not make the number mean anything. It was too big. It didn't fit inside a life like his. He kept looking at it, waiting for it to be a mistake, waiting for a second text that said error, disregard the way good things in his life always came with a second text. The second text didn't come. Mr. Turner, Victoria's voice gentler than he'd have thought her capable of. Is it there? He looked up, and he couldn't speak. He just turned the phone around screen out so she could see it, so they could all see it, and his face did something then that made even the hardest people in that room look away, because a grown man realizing he never has to be afraid of the first of the month again is not a thing you're supposed to watch too closely. It's there, he managed. And then because his mind went where it always went, the same place it had gone every hour of every day for 4 years. Zoe, my daughter. She needs the summer program I owe them for July and her shoes. Her shoes have holes in them. She's been wearing them with holes because I kept telling her next paycheck. Next paycheck. He stopped because his voice had cracked wide open, and he pressed the back of his hand against his mouth, and for a moment, the boardroom watched a man come apart very quietly, the way strong men come apart, holding it in, even as it broke him. She won't wear shoes with holes in them again, Victoria said. Not ever. I'll see to it personally if I have to. You don't have to see to anything, Malik said, wiping his face, pulling himself back together with a visible effort of will. That's the point. For 4 years, everything was somebody else seeing to it or not seeing to it, and me just waiting, hoping. Now I can see to it myself. Do you understand what that is? To be able to take care of your own child yourself. He looked at her, really looked at her. This woman who had never in her life wondered whether she could afford shoes. No, you don't. And I hope to God you never have to. But that's what you just gave me, and it's not the money. It's the never being afraid again. That's the thing. That's the thing money actually buys, and nobody who has it ever knows. Victoria Langford was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice had changed. Marcus, she said. Clear the room. Marcus blinked. Victoria, everyone out, all of you. Now, I want to speak with Mr. Turner alone. She scanned the table, and her eyes had gone hard again back to the woman they all feared. And before you go, every single person in this room signed off on some piece of the Beaumont deal. Every one of you touched it and passed it along and told me it was clean. I said this morning nobody loses their job today, and I keep my promises, so you're all still employed as of this minute. But understand something. She let the silence stretch until it hurt. The man you stepped over caught what all of you missed. So starting Monday, every one of you is going to be trained by him if he'll agree to it. You're going to sit in a room and let the janitor teach you how to read. And if that wounds your pride, She smiled, without any warmth at all. Good. Pride's what almost cost us $200 million. Now get out. They got out. 20-some of the most powerful people in the city filing out of a boardroom in silence, and every one of them as they passed Malik did something they had never done before. They looked at him. Marcus Webb paused at the door and opened his mouth as if to say something, thought better of it, and simply nodded, a small grave nod, the nod of a proud man, acknowledging he'd been wrong in a way he'd be a long time living down. Chad Bellamy didn't say anything either, but he slowed as he passed, and he said so quietly, only Malik heard it. My grandfather was a custodian, 40 years at a school. I never told anybody that here. I'm sorry I forgot it. And then he was gone. And then it was just the two of them. The billionaire and the janitor, alone in a room built for wars over money with $3 million newly resting in a marriage account that had once held $9.40. Sit down, Mr. Turner, Victoria said. Please, you look like you're about to fall over, and I'd rather you didn't do it standing. He sat. He was in fact about to fall over. The adrenaline that had carried him through the last hour was gone completely now, and what was left was a bone-deep exhaustion. A man who'd worked a full night shift on no sleep, and then walked into the fight of his life. Victoria sat across from him, not at the head of the table now, but directly across close, and she folded her hands, and for a while, she just looked at him. I'm going to tell you something I don't tell people, she said finally. When I was 31 years old, I got passed over for a promotion I'd earned. Earned outright, no question, twice the numbers of the man they gave it to. And when I asked why the chairman, an old man dead, now told me, and I'll never forget it, he said, Victoria, you're the smartest person I've got. But people need to be able to see themselves in their leaders, and nobody's going to see themselves in you. She paused. He meant because I was a woman. In 1993 in that industry, that's what that meant. And I walked out of his office, and I decided two things. One, that I would build something so big and so mine that no old man would ever get to tell me what people could see in me again. And two, she looked at Malik, that I would never ever mistake what a person looks like for what a person is. That was the promise I made myself 30 years ago. And, Malik said, and I broke it, Victoria said flatly. Every single day for 4 years. I broke it every time I walked past you and saw a uniform instead of a man. I'm the one who's supposed to see what everyone else misses, Mr. Turner. It's the whole thing I'm proud of. It's the thing I built my life on. And I missed you. You were in my building the entire time, and I missed you the exact way that chairman missed me, and I didn't even have the excuse of prejudice I could name, I just didn't look, so. She spread her hands. That's why you got the whole $3 million and not a dollar less, and that's why I cleared the room. Because I owed you more than a bet. I owed you an apology, and I don't apologize in front of audiences. What I did to you this morning, I dressed up my own failure as a test of yours. I made you perform for people who should have been performing for you, and I'm sorry for it. Malik was quiet. It was, he realized, the first genuine apology anyone in this world had given him in 4 years. Not the professional condolences, not the so sorry for your loss that people said and forgot, but a real apology from someone who had actually wronged him and knew it. I accept it, he said, but I want you to know I didn't do any of this for you, or for the company, or even really for the money. I didn't know the money was real until it hit my phone. He leaned forward. I did it because for 4 years I've been disappearing, on purpose. I taught myself to be nothing so that nothing could hurt me. And it worked. Nobody hurt me because nobody saw me. But you can't disappear halfway, Ms. Langford. You can't make yourself invisible to the world and still be visible to your own kid. My daughter was starting to disappear too. She was learning it from me, learning to make herself small, learning that we're the kind of people things happen to instead of the kind of people who make things happen. His voice thickened. And last night I read that contract, and I felt like myself for the first time in 4 years, and I thought if I put that pencil down, if I walk away, I'm teaching Zoe to walk away too. So I picked it up. Not for you, for her. So she'd have a father who didn't run from the truth. That's the only reason any of this happened. Victoria absorbed this. And something moved behind her eyes, some recalibration, the sense of a woman who had thought she understood a situation and was realizing it was deeper than she'd known. "How old is she?" Victoria asked. "Your daughter?" 7. "And her mother, your wife. You said she taught you the clause. The one on the last page." Danielle. Just saying the name in that room out loud to this woman did something to him. She was a legal translator, the best I ever saw. She could read a contract in 4 languages and tell you what the man who wrote it was scared of. Everything I did in here today, every trap I found, she found harder ones in her sleep for clients who never knew how close they came to ruin, because Danielle Turner caught it first. He swallowed. A drunk driver killed her 4 years ago, crossing the street to pick up Zoe from daycare. And He stopped. I fell apart. My firm let me go. The savings ran out. And I ended up here with a mop because it was the only work I could get that didn't require me to be a whole person. And I wasn't a whole person anymore. I was just a man keeping a little girl alive. You were more than that, Victoria said quietly. No, I wasn't. Not for a long time. He looked at his hands. I want to be honest with you, because you were honest with me. I'm not some noble hero who chose humility. I chose hiding. There's a difference, and I don't want you building me into something I'm not. I gave up. For 4 years, I gave up on everything except her. And the only reason I stopped hiding is that I got cornered into a room, and I had a choice between disappearing one more time or being the man my wife married, and I was just barely brave enough to pick the second one. That's the whole truth. Don't make me a saint. I'm a scared man who got one thing right on one day. Victoria was silent for a long moment. Then she said something that surprised him. That's the most honest thing anyone said to me in this building in a decade, she said. And it's exactly why I want to offer you a job. Malik almost laughed. A job. Not a job. The job. Victoria stood and began to pace the way she did when her mind was moving fast. I have a legal division of 40 people who, as you demonstrated to devastating effect this morning, cannot reliably read the documents that carry the largest risks in this company. We do business in 11 countries. We sign contracts in 6 languages. And every one of those contracts is a Beaumont. Everyone is somebody on the other side of the table who knows exactly how American firms read foreign documents and builds their traps in our blind spots. She turned to him. I need someone whose entire job is to find those traps. To do to every contract we touch what you did to that one. To read what the words are afraid to say, that's your wife's phrase, isn't it? I heard you use it. It's a good phrase. It's better than anything my 40 lawyers have ever said. You want me to be a lawyer again? I want you to be something we don't have a name for yet, Victoria said. Not a lawyer exactly. The bar admissions, the licensing. We can sort that out, and frankly, some of what you do isn't practicing law. It's something rarer. I want you to be the person who reads the last page. The person who assumes every clean English translation is a lie until proven otherwise. The person who catches the dans la mesure du raisonnable and the la langue fait foi, and the 11 other things my expensive lawyers will keep missing until the day they retire, because it's not in them the way it's in you. She stopped pacing. Name your title, name your salary, I'll pay it. And there it was, the offer. The thing that in the story Malik might once have imagined for his life was supposed to be the happy ending, the billionaire's redemption. The janitor lifted up the fairy tale where the deserving man is finally rewarded. But Malik Turner had learned some things in 4 years of pushing a cart, and one of them was that when the powerful offer you a place at their table, you'd better understand exactly what you're being asked to trade for the chair. Can I ask you something before I answer? He said. Of course. This morning you humiliated your own lawyers to teach them a lesson. You told me you build your company on knowing where the value is. You've got a reputation. He chose his words carefully. I've heard the night staff talk. You test people. You break them a little to see what they're made of. You did it to me today and you called it a bet. He met her eyes. So I need to know. If I take this job, if I come work for you, am I a person to you now, Or am I just a more valuable thing than I was this morning? Because I spent 4 years being a thing to everyone in this building. I'm not trading a mop for a nicer version of the same invisibility. I won't do it. Not even for the salary. I've got $3 million and a daughter who needs a father more than she needs a rich one. So tell me the truth. What am I to you? It was perhaps the most direct question anyone had asked Victoria Langford in 30 years. And she did not answer it quickly, which was, Malik would later understand, the most honest thing she could have done. She sat back down. She thought about it. She thought about it long enough that the silence became its own kind of answer. An answer that said, I'm taking your question seriously enough not to lie to you. This morning, she said finally, you were a thing to me. You're right. When I watched you on that camera and pulled your file, I thought here's an asset I've been underutilizing. That's the truth, and you'd know it if I dressed it up, so I won't. She leaned forward. But somewhere in the last hour, Mr. Turner, that changed. And I can tell you exactly when. It was when you asked me what would happen to my lawyers before you'd agree to expose them. You stood there with $3 million in front of you, and you worried about the jobs of the people who'd just been laughing at you. I've employed thousands of people. I've never once seen anyone do that. And I realized I wasn't looking at an asset. I was looking at a better person than I am. She held his gaze. So here's your answer, and it's the only one I've got. You started today as a thing to me. You're ending it as one of maybe 3 people alive whose good opinion I'd actually care about losing. I can't promise you I'll always get it right. I've got 30 years of bad habits, and I'll probably walk past somebody tomorrow the way I walked past you for 4 years. But I'll know I'm doing it now. You took that away from me. I can't unsee you anymore, and I don't think I can unsee the others either, the ones with the carts. That's what you did to me today. And no, I didn't put that in the bet, and no, it's not worth $3 million. It's worth more. Malik studied her. And he believed her, not completely, not naively, because he was too old and too broken to believe anyone completely, but enough. Enough to know that whatever this woman was, she wasn't lying to him now. I'll think about the job, he said. That's all I can give you today. I'll think about it. Because I meant what I said. Zoe needs a father more than a rich one, and I don't know yet whether working for you makes me more of a father or less of one. That's the only math that matters to me now, not the salary. That's a fair answer, Victoria said. Take the weekend. Take a month. The offer doesn't expire. She paused. But Mr. Turner, whatever you decide, you're not cleaning these floors anymore. That ends today. I'll keep you on payroll at your full custodial wage indefinitely while you think, and you'll never touch a mop in this building again. That's not charity. It's the correction of an error. You should never have been holding that mop in the first place, and I'm not going to let you hold it one more night while you decide what you actually want to be. Malik opened his mouth to protest 4 years of pride of, I don't take handouts, rising up automatically, and then he stopped. Because he looked at the phone still in his hand, at the number that had changed everything. And he understood that the fight he'd been fighting for 4 years, the desperate daily fight to keep himself and his daughter afloat, was over. He'd won it. He didn't have to be proud anymore. He could just be tired. He could just be a father who was finally going home. Okay, he said, okay. And then, because his body had been running on nothing for 18 hours, and the adrenaline was fully gone, and the number on his phone was real, and Zoe's shoes were real, and Danielle was suddenly overwhelmingly present in that room. Malik Turner put his face in his hands, and in front of Victoria Langford, one of the most powerful people in the world, he finally let himself cry. Not the 10-second rationed grief he'd allowed himself in hallways for 4 years. The real thing. The whole flood of it. 4 years of it. And Victoria Langford, who did not comfort people, who had no idea how, who had built her entire empire on never once appearing to need or offer comfort, sat across from a weeping janitor in her boardroom and did the only thing she could think to do. She reached across the table and she put her hand on his shoulder, and she let him cry, and she said nothing at all. Because some things she was learning at 60 years old from a man who cleaned floors, some things didn't need a single word. They just needed someone finally to stay in the room, to not walk past, to see. He didn't take the job, not that day and not that month, not that. He took Zoe to buy shoes first. That was the first thing he did with the money. Not a house, not a car, not a single thing for himself. He picked her up from the summer program that very afternoon, still in the charcoal suit, and when she saw him standing there in a suit instead of the gray uniform, she stopped dead in the doorway and stared at him like he was a stranger. "Daddy, why are you dressed fancy?" "Because," Malik said, crouching down to her level, "today was a very important day. And I have something to tell you. But first we're going to go buy you shoes, real ones. Any ones you want." Zoe's face did something complicated. She was 7, but she was his and Danielle's, which meant she was sharper than 7 had any right to be, and she'd spent her whole conscious life learning to read her father's moods the way he read contracts. She knew the shape of, "we can't afford it." She'd learned to stop asking for things because she'd seen what it did to his face when he had to say no. "The ones with the lights?" she asked, very carefully testing. "The ones that light up when you walk." "The ones with the lights," Malik confirmed. "And the sparkles if they've got sparkles, and a second pair for when those get dirty, and new sneakers for running, and those rain boots you wanted in the fall that I said next time, next time." His voice caught. "It's next time, baby. It's finally next time." She didn't understand yet, but she understood his face, and his face was doing something it hadn't done in a very long time. It was light. So she took his hand, and they walked out together. The janitor and his daughter, and Malik Turner bought his little girl shoes that lit up when she walked and stood in the middle of the store, watching her run up and down the aisle, laughing. The little lights flashing red and blue with every step, and he thought his heart might break clean in half from the simple, impossible joy of it. That night, after the shoes after dinner at a restaurant with cloth napkins that Zoe kept touching like they were made of magic after she'd finally fallen asleep, still wearing the new shoes. Because she refused to take them off that night, Malik sat at the kitchen table where Danielle used to teach him, and he talked to her. "You'd have caught it faster than me," he said to the empty chair across from him. "Page 31. You'd have gone straight to the last page. You always went to the last page first. That's where they bury the bodies, you used to say." He turned his coffee cup in his hands. "I did it, Danny, in front of all of them. And they laughed, and then they stopped laughing, and there was this Frenchman, this lawyer, and he called me a parrot in French, because he thought I couldn't understand him, and I—" His voice broke, and he laughed and cried at the same time. "I answered him, in French. Your French. The French you made us speak on Tuesdays so Zoe would grow up with it. And you should have seen his face, baby. You should have seen it." The empty chair said nothing. It never did. But Malik sat with it a long time that night, and for the first time since she died, sitting in the grief didn't feel like drowning. It felt like company. He waited 3 weeks before he called Victoria Langford back. In those 3 weeks, he did a lot of thinking, and a lot of it was hard. Because the truth was that $3 million invested carefully could mean he never had to work again, could mean he could be home for Zoe every single day, could pick her up from school and cook her dinner, and be the father he'd never gotten to be while working nights. That was one life. It was a good life. It was the life the old hiding Malik wanted, the one where he took his winnings and disappeared into safety and never risked being seen again. But there was another life, and it wouldn't leave him alone. He kept thinking about what he'd said to Victoria in that boardroom. There are people out there pushing carts past your office at midnight, and every single one of them is somebody's genius that the world decided not to see. He'd meant it as an accusation, but it kept coming back to him as a question. Because if that was true, and he knew it was true, he'd lived it. Then what did it mean for him to take his $3 million and vanish? What did it mean to be the one who got seen? The one who got out and then to pull the ladder up behind him? Danielle wouldn't have pulled up the ladder. Danielle had spent her whole career catching the traps that would have ruined people who never even knew she existed. Danielle believed that the whole point of being able to read what the words were afraid to say was to protect the people who couldn't. So when he called Victoria back, he didn't say yes to her offer. He made her a different one, I'll come work for you, he told her sitting across from her in that same office 3 weeks later. But not as an employee. Not as a title you invented and a salary you set. I'll come as a partner in something we're going to build together. And I want to tell you what it is before you say yes or no. Because if you say no to this part, then I say no to all of it, and I go home to my daughter, and we're both fine either way. Victoria leaned back. I'm listening. You've got 40 lawyers who can't reliably read your highest risk contracts. That's not a Langford problem. That's an everybody problem. Every firm in this country reads foreign contracts the same lazy way trusts translations, the same way skips the last page the same way. Which means every firm in this country is getting quietly robbed by adversaries who know exactly where the blind spot is. He leaned forward. I want to build a division that fixes it. Not just for Langford. A whole system, a way of reading international contracts that assumes every clean translation is a lie until proven otherwise, that treats language itself as the place the fraud lives. I'll build it based on what my wife taught me, because she'd figured all this out 20 years ago and nobody was listening. And I'll staff it. This is the part you have to agree to. This is the non-negotiable part. I'll staff it with people the system threw away. People who learned languages outside of school because they had to. Immigrants. Refugees. The woman cleaning your floors tonight who speaks 4 languages nobody ever asked her about. The men driving your executives home who understood every word said in the back seat and were never once asked their opinion. There's a whole invisible workforce in this country that's fluent in exactly the things your expensive lawyers aren't, and everybody walks past them the way you all walked past me. Victoria was very still. You want to build a legal division out of janitors. I want to build it out of people, Malik said. The same way you found me, except this time it won't be an accident. This time we'll go looking. Because I promise you, Ms. Langford, for every Malik Turner you tripped over by luck, there are 100 more you'd find on purpose if you just decided to look. And they will make you a fortune and save you a fortune, and they'll do it because for once in their lives, somebody saw what they actually are instead of what they're wearing. The office was silent for a long moment. That's a much bigger idea than the one I offered you, Victoria said slowly. Yes. It's riskier. It's harder. It'll make me enemies. There are people in this industry who will hate the sight of it, who'll say I've lost my mind, who'll say I'm running a charity instead of a company. Yes, Malik said. And every one of them will be wrong. And you'll prove it every quarter. When my division catches the traps, theirs miss. Charity loses money. This makes money. It just makes money by seeing people, which most of them have never tried, so they don't know it works. He held her eyes. You told me you spent 30 years looking for people who see what everyone else misses. Here's your chance to build a whole department of them. Or you can give me a nice title and a corner office and waste me the way you'd have kept wasting me if I hadn't picked up that pencil. Your call. Victoria Langford looked at the janitor across her desk for a long time. Then she extended her hand. Build it, she said. Whatever you need, build it. They shook on it. And that handshake, more than the $3 million, more than the boardroom, more than the Frenchman's ruined face. That handshake was the moment Malik Turner stopped being a ghost. They called it the Danielle Turner Group. Victoria had wanted to name it something corporate and forgettable, something with global and solutions in it, and Malik had said no, it gets her name or it doesn't get built, and Victoria, who was learning slowly that this man did not bluff, had agreed. So it was the Danielle Turner Group, and the first thing Malik did was hang a small framed photograph of his wife in the entrance, and under it, engraved on a brass plate, the words she'd said to him 1,000 times. The real truth is always hidden beneath the language. The division grew faster than anyone predicted. Malik hired his first analyst out of the night custodial staff, a Somali woman named Amina, who spoke 5 languages and had a degree in law from a university in Mogadishu that no American firm would recognize, who had been cleaning offices for 6 years, while men in suits stepped over her. He found his second in a parking garage, an Iranian man who'd been a judge in Tehran before he fled, now attending cars for $11 an hour. His third had been a translator for the U.S. military in Afghanistan, and had come to America on a special visa and found that the only work anyone would give him was driving for a rideshare app. Every one of them, when Malik sat across from them and asked them to read a contract and tell him what it was afraid to say, did something that made his chest ache. They lit up. They came alive. They became in front of him the people they'd always been and had been forced to hide. Within a year, the Danielle Turner Group had caught 11 traps in international contracts across Langford's portfolio that the traditional legal division would have missed, saving the company a figure that Victoria stopped quoting out loud because it embarrassed her old lawyers. Within 2 years, other companies were paying Langford consulting fees to have Malik's team review their deals. Within 3, there was a waiting list. Marcus Webb, to his enormous credit, came to Malik in the 2nd year and asked humbly, a proud man swallowing hard, if his lawyers could sit in on the Danielle Turner Group's training sessions. Not the mandatory ones Victoria had forced on him. Voluntarily. Because he'd watched Malik's team of former janitors and drivers and refugees outperform his Ivy League associates over and over. And he was too good a lawyer in the end to let his pride cost him the lesson. "I stepped over you," Marcus said, standing awkwardly in Malik's office. "Not literally like Bellamy did, but for 4 years I walked past you and I saw furniture. I need you to know I know that. And I need you to teach my people anyway because they'll be better lawyers for it. And being a good lawyer matters more to me than being comfortable about how I treated you. That's the most honest thing anyone in this building said to me since your boss apologized," Malik told him. "Bring your people Monday. I'll teach them. And Marcus," he paused, "you were never furniture to me either. I saw all of you every night for 4 years. That's the thing nobody understood. The invisible man sees everything. That's what makes him dangerous." Chad Bellamy transferred into the Danielle Turner Group at his own request in the 3rd year. He turned out, once someone actually invested in him, to have a real gift for it. The grandson of a custodian, it seemed, had inherited something after all. He became one of Malik's best people. And once a year, on the anniversary of that boardroom, Chad would buy Malik a coffee and say, "Thank you for not letting them fire me." And Malik would say, "Thank you for remembering your grandfather." And neither of them ever needed to say more than that. Zoe grew up in a different world than the one she'd been born into. Not just because of the money, though. The money mattered. The money meant a house with a yard, a good school, shoes that lit up. And then, as she got older, shoes that didn't, because she decided lights were for babies. The money meant Malik could be there every morning and every night, could coach her soccer team and help with her homework, and be the father who was present instead of the father who was always at work or always asleep. But the deeper change was something else. Zoe grew up watching her father be seen. She grew up going to his office and meeting Amina and the Iranian judge and the Afghan translator, watching a room full of people who the world had thrown away, doing brilliant, essential work, and being respected for it. She grew up understanding in her bones that the world's judgment of a person's worth was often just laziness, dressed up as certainty. That the man mopping the floor might be a genius. That the woman parking your car might have been a lawyer. That you never ever knew, and so you always looked, you gave every single person the dignity of being seen. When she was 12, she asked him about her mother's clause, the one on the last page. "Tell me again," she said. "The thing about the language." And Malik, who had told her this story her whole life, told it again the way he always did, the way it had become the founding myth of their small family. "Your mother taught me that the real truth is always hidden beneath the language. That people write contracts and laws, and even the things they say to your face, and they hide what they're really afraid of down underneath the words. And most people never learn to read that. They take the words at face value, and they get robbed. But your mother could read it. She could look at a page and see the fear underneath the lie, underneath the truth the writer was trying to bury." He smiled. "And she taught me. And now I teach it to everyone I hire. And someday, if you want it, I'll teach it to you." "I already know it," Zoe said with the supreme confidence of 12. "You've been teaching me my whole life. You just didn't call it that." And Malik looked at his daughter, who had her mother's chin and her mother's sharp eyes and her mother's way of seeing straight through to the thing underneath, and he realized she was right. He'd been teaching her all along. Danielle was in her. Danielle would always be in her. The clause on the last page would outlive them all. The scholarship came in the 5th year. It was Zoe's idea, actually. She was 13 by then, and she'd asked her father why the people he hired had to be found, why they had to get lucky enough to be discovered by him, why there wasn't a way for them to get where they were going without needing a Malik Turner to trip over them first. Because the system only counts certain kinds of learning, Malik told her. Amina got her law degree in Mogadishu, but no American school recognizes it, so on paper she's nobody. The judge from Tehran, 30 years on the bench, but he can't practice here, his whole life's work doesn't count. The system says you only learned something if you learned it the approved way in the approved place with the approved paperwork. And that throws away millions of people who learned the real thing the hard way. That's stupid, Zoe said. It's very stupid, Malik agreed. So what do we do about it? And that was how the Danielle Turner Scholarship was born, a fund endowed initially by Malik and matched after some persuading by a Victoria Langford who had grown genuinely fond of being persuaded by this family. The scholarship existed for one purpose, to support people who had learned outside traditional systems. Immigrants with foreign credentials that didn't transfer. Self-taught polyglots. Refugees who'd been professionals in their old countries and were starting over. People who knew things, real and valuable things, that the paperwork refused to recognize. The scholarship didn't just give them money, it gave them a bridge mentorship, credential support connections, and the simple transformative experience of being told that what they knew counted. At the first scholarship ceremony, Malik stood at a podium in a room full of people who had spent their lives being invisible, and he did not give the speech anyone expected. "I'm not going to tell you that you're going to make it," he said. "Some of you will, and some of you won't, and anybody who promises you otherwise is selling something. What I'm going to tell you is this." He gripped the sides of the podium. "For 4 years, I cleaned the floors of a building full of people who never learned my name. I had a law degree in my closet, and a genius in my head that my wife put there, and every single night I made myself invisible so the world couldn't hurt me. And it worked. Nobody hurt me. But nobody saw me either, and I want to tell you what I learned from that because it's the only thing I really know." He looked out at them. "The world will try to make you disappear. It will look at your uniform, and not your mind, your accent, and not your intelligence, your paperwork, and not your soul. And you will be tempted. God, you will be tempted to help it, to make yourself small, to hide because hiding feels safe." He paused. "Don't," he said. "Don't you dare. Because the world didn't discover my intelligence the day I read that contract. My intelligence was there the whole time, every night for 4 years, sitting in a man pushing a cart past executives who couldn't see him. The world didn't discover me. It just finally for one moment stopped ignoring me. And that's all any of you need. Not to be discovered, you're already everything you need to be. Just to be seen once by the right person at the right moment. So my job now, the whole reason this scholarship exists, is to be that person for as many of you as I can find. To do on purpose what got done to me by accident. To look. To keep looking. To never ever walk past a single one of you again." The room was silent. And then it wasn't because a woman in the 3rd row, a former surgeon from Venezuela driving a delivery van in America, because her medical license didn't transfer, stood up and began to clap. And then they all stood. All of them, a whole room of the invisible finally being seen, and the sound they made was the loudest thing Malik Turner had ever heard. Years later, when Zoe Turner graduated from law school, the traditional way, the approved way with the paperwork, the system recognized, because she'd decided the best way to break a broken system was to master it, and then dismantle it from the inside. She gave a speech at her own commencement. And she told the story. Her father's story. The night janitor, and the sealed French contract, and the bet, and the boardroom, and the Frenchman who called him a parrot. She told it the way it had been told to her 1,000 times, the founding myth of her family, and the auditorium full of new lawyers listened in complete silence. "My father is here today," she said, and the cameras found him in the audience. An older man, now silver coming into his hair, sitting beside a woman most of them recognized as one of the most powerful CEOs in the country. the two of them long since something like family. And I want to end with the thing he taught me, which is the thing my mother taught him, which is the only thing I really believe about the law, or about people, or about anything at all. She looked at her father. The real truth is always hidden beneath the language. It's true of contracts. It's true of laws. And it's true of people. Every single person you will ever meet is carrying something underneath what you can see, some genius or grief or story that the surface will never show you. And your whole job as lawyers, as people, as human beings sharing a world, your whole job is to be brave enough and humble enough and awake enough to read it. To look at the man with the mop and wonder what he knows. To look at the woman parking your car and ask what she left behind. To never, ever mistake what a person looks like for what a person is. She lifted her diploma. My father was invisible for 4 years. Zoe Turner said, her voice ringing out clear and certain across the silent hall. And then the world stopped ignoring him, and everything I am, everything this whole room is about to become, exists because one man refused to disappear and one woman finally decided to look. So look, for the rest of your lives, at every single person you meet, look, because the most valuable mind you'll ever encounter might be holding a mop. Mine was. In the audience, Malik Turner wept the way he'd wept in that boardroom all those years ago, openly and without shame. And beside him, Victoria Langford, who still did not comfort people, who had never learned how, who had spent the last decades learning to look, and would spend the rest of her life at it, reached over and put her hand on his shoulder and said nothing and stayed. Because that was the whole thing. That had always been the whole thing. Not to be discovered, not to be rewarded, not to be lifted from invisibility by some billionaire's whim or some lucky accident with a pencil at midnight. Just to be seen. Once. By someone who was finally truly looking. Malik Turner had been the most valuable mind in that glass tower for 4 years, and it had taken a bet and a boardroom and the ghost of his brilliant wife to make anyone notice. But they noticed. And he made sure for the rest of his life that 1,000 others would be noticed too. The ones with the carts, the ones with the accents, the ones with the credentials that didn't count, the ones the world had decided not to see. The world doesn't discover the intelligence of the invisible. It's simply, one day, if we are lucky, if we are brave, if we are finally paying attention, it stops ignoring them. And Malik Turner spent the rest of his days making sure that day came for everyone he could reach.